Charles Reid is our Associate Professor of Voice on this campus. He has a long history of vocal performance, including a member of the Metropolitan Opera in New York for many years. So he's going to talk to us today about finding your voice. Now, this is interesting because I don't think he has any problem finding his voice. We'll see.
Oh, I did. I had a major problem. Okay, we don't want to trip on this. Let's see here. Okay. Well, in a way, I don't feel like my topic is as important as what you spoke on, Dennis. But but it's a topic that has been of great importance in my career, and I just in a way, because I think this is an obvious point.
Make sure you put your mic on. Coming down.
Oh, is it not? Okay. I think this is an obvious point that we sometimes miss, especially in academia, in places of mentorship and professorship, that we forget to allow people to actually find their own voice, and this is problematic. And so that's why we're going to talk about it today. Okay, there are several synonyms that we can use for the voice. I'm not actually here to give you a voice lesson today, but to talk about your inner voice, so to speak. And one might be instinct. Another could be conscience. Another could be intuition. And lastly, gut or gut instinct. And all of these are sort of in the area of what I'm talking about. With instinct, we have a problem that this is an unalterable tendency, and it doesn't necessarily involve reason. And with conscience, we're really talking about morality. And while what I'm speaking to you about today does have to do with morality, which is the morality of truth, your truth, it's not really the same thing as conscience. Intuition is similarly linked to instinct, also not really being based on reason. And then the gut is maybe a little bit closer. It's based on emotion. And I do think that emotion can be informed. You can change how you perceive things and how you respond emotionally with new information. And that's something that's key. So these synonyms aren't really what I'm talking about, but when we talk about the word voice, and you scroll down in the dictionary, long past all the different utterances about how to create a sound, then you get to this definition: wish, choice, or opinion, openly or formally expressed. And I think this is more what I'm speaking about. It's your wish, it's your opinion, your choice, and you openly use it, you express it, you follow it. Okay, so we each have a voice. I think we can agree on that. We each have a voice. Does it come from God? Or could it possibly be the still small voice of God? I mean, I think everybody has a voice, whether they're a believer or not. And I'd like to believe personally that this voice is probably the voice of God. It's something that we're born with. It's something we have deep in us. And we can listen to it or not. We can listen to what we're hearing there. I'm not sure that it's the Holy Spirit. Maybe a theologian would correct me on this assertion, because I think the Holy Spirit is something that we encounter in belief. We encounter when we accept and follow God. But I would say that if you've accepted or invited the Holy Spirit into your life, then your voice is greatly influenced and shaped by the Holy Spirit. And the last point is, going back to the first point, is that this voice is unique to each individual. My voice is not your voice is not my voice. It's an obvious thing, and yet it's somehow something we forget. So I have three basic principles that I'd like to suggest. That we should trust it, we should inform it, and we should follow it. And in this way, I say that we need to trust it because I believe that your voice is the best of who you are at that given moment in time. It's the best of who you are at that given moment in time, based on what you know. Now, we also need to inform it, because if you don't inform your voice and you launch out with confidence in your voice, you could be launching out with confidence in a very poor voice. It could be let's say a not very smart voice. And so doing your research is critical. So I'm not talking about ignoring research. I'm not talking about ignoring the advice of authorities and mentors around you, but you need to inform it so that your voice will know how to respond. Now, there are two basic types of information. There's original information and secondary information. As a singer, I operate, when I say original information, I'm talking about the poet or the librettist, and I'm talking about the composer. And so the poet deals in words, the librettist, the composer deals in music, and it's my job to try to understand what each of these two components are bringing to the table. It's my job to really try to grasp what they're saying, because they're the original. And in fact, if you think about it, they are telling me their voice, right? They wrote these words, or they wrote this music, and I need to give really careful consideration if my voice is disagreeing with what I believe their voice is saying. That's important. It's the same way with our faith. You know, the original is God, and the original is the Bible, and we have to give special consideration if we think we're going to go against what we see there. Now, secondary sources are a whole nother matter. It doesn't mean that they're not valuable. In fact, they are very valuable. And you should be able to operate with secondary input, whether it be your research, your mentors, well-respected figures around you. But their information should never supersede your voice. So as long as you can present your voice in harmony with what the secondary sources say, I say go for it. But when you're in conflict, you need to trust your voice. And that gets to following it, which is too often a very obvious and simple idea, and yet something we fail to do. And the result of that failure is summed up here, that many great ideas are lost in creative research and output because individuals suppress their voice and relinquish control to the voice of another. And I think this is something we've all seen. Maybe we've taken too heavy a hand in advising a student, and the student ends up presenting something which isn't really theirs. It's ours. And so this is important. We want the real idea to come from each individual. It may not be a great idea. It might fail. But how many great ideas might be squelched in the process of asking people to suppress their voice? Okay, I said I would relay these ideas through my performance history, and memorable performances basically fall into three categories for me. There are the funny, unintended category of performances, and they're hard to forget because they really make a mark. They weren't planned, and I'll share one of those. Then there are those sublime moments where things exceed your best expectations, where things come together. You've done your job, you did what you expected, and then something else happens. It's a God moment. And then there are those difficult times when we struggle. And the thing about struggle, as we all know in our faith, is that struggle is actually good. So we should be thankful for our struggles, because it's through struggles that we actually advance. We can learn, we can grow. And it is through moments of struggle that I actually found my voice. It's actually through moments of struggle that I discovered I had lost my voice, not my singing voice, but my internal voice. Okay, so I'll start out with something funny. I'll try to condense these into a little bit faster stories. Nemorino, I was singing this role in Donizetti's L'Elisir d'Amore, and it's a comic opera already, but what happened was not intended, which was in the second act, at the very beginning of the act, the director thought it would be a great idea if Nemorino, in his despair, jumped off a cliff only to survive and have to continue the rest of the act. So I jumped off the cliff just as I had done in the dress rehearsal, and in the dress rehearsal I landed on one mattress, but in the opening night performance I landed on 3. And they were very soft. And I went down, 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 rip. That's right. a foot and a half of open gaping hole in my pants at the beginning of the second act of an opera where I needed to be on stage for at least 40 minutes. Okay, now, I couldn't even leave the stage. I think I scooted up on my backside up the other side of the hill, and I heard a very clear message from my voice. It said, "Do not turn around to the audience," right? So I didn't, and went on to the next scene with all the soldiers, and they were trying to hold back their laughs as my pants were flopping in the wind. And I finally get off the stage, and a costumer rushes over, and he literally just shoved me over, and he starts stitching me up. I'm wearing my pants, and he's stitching me closed. And then at some point I said, "I got to get back on stage." And he goes, "Okay." And so he stopped. I ran back out on stage, did the next scene with the ladies. Somehow we made it through that. And then I ran back off, and he started stitching me back up. And alas, he finishes closing the hole in time for the famous aria Una furtiva lagrima, which comes at the end of the opera. And it's actually a really serious moment in a comic opera. And it was a great and funny experience, not particularly pertaining to finding your voice, but just wanted to give you something funny. Okay, so now this next one, though, is something sublime, and I think it does tie into the voice. I was performing Rodolfo in Fairbanks, Alaska, which is way out in the middle of nowhere. And so my mother decided that she would make a good trip out of it. It'd be a vacation time. It'd be a time for mother-son time. And also she'd get to hear me perform a great opera. If you've never seen La Boheme, it's definitely one of the more sympathetic operas to experience. And so I picked her up at the airport. And it was the day of the dress rehearsal. So I picked her up at the airport. We went to the dress rehearsal, and I launched into the performance. At intermission, I checked in with her. She was doing fine, kind of finishing up a book she'd been reading on the plane, and paying attention a little bit. But she was there to see the performances, not the rehearsal. And then we went through the rest of the opera. And at the end, I came out to the house, and instead of fine, I discovered something I didn't expect, that she had tears streaming down her face. And she could hardly speak, and through her sobs, she said to me, "This is the first time I've really cried since your father passed away," which was a whole year before, a whole year. And what had happened here, I think, is that I had a director who actually liked my voice. I'm talking about my inner voice. In fact, it was a little freaky because in Germany, directors are a little bit more domineering. And here, I had this director who wasn't giving me much advice at all. And so over lunch one day, I said, you can tell me, you can beat me up. It's okay. I can take it. And he said, "No, I like it." He goes, "It's clear. You're listening to your colleagues, and you react, and it looks natural, and you're paying attention to the little notes that Puccini wrote in the score, and I don't have a lot to say." He says, "Keep doing it." And the conductor, fortunately, had similar ideas. He didn't want me to do drastic changes to my musical ideas. They allowed me to follow my voice. And what resulted in this performance, it wasn't just me, for the whole cast, what resulted was great music, great story, combined with authentic acting and authentic singing. And it turned into something more. It turned into something that absolutely broke my mom wide open. I don't think that happens in a normal performance, but it happened because the voice was allowed to come through. And it doesn't always happen that way. My first experience in Germany was with the role of Belmonte in Die Entführung aus dem Sariah, the abduction from the Sariah. And I had to prepare before arriving in Germany, and I did. I prepared very well. Coached like crazy. I had learned all my notes, all my rhythms. I had studied the German words very carefully for correct pronunciation and meaning. I had researched and read through the libretto several times, looking for the deep meanings of the story, and worked on musical phrasing and committed it all to memory. This was a lot of work. And all of that before I showed up to start the rehearsals. And that's actually what we do. That's the normal pattern. You have to do all that research, which is informing your voice. And through that information, I arrived at certain conclusions about my character. So his name is Belmonte, which means beautiful mountain. Is that correct? Yeah. He's rock solid. And what he sings about is love all the time. He's actually just a little bit boring and ridiculous. He goes on and on about love. And he's immovable. And he's there to rescue his beloved Constanza. And Constanza literally means constancy or faithfulness. And her story is that she has the struggle about whether or not to remain faithful to Belmonte, who she doesn't know if she'll ever see again. And so Constanza is being faithful to Belmonte instead of conceding to the wishes of her captor, the Bassazeli. And these two little points were very clear to me after all of my work. And I showed up to rehearsal and got into about the second rehearsal or so and realized that the director had a very different idea. In fact, he had recently gone through a divorce. He didn't believe in the idea of true love or faithfulness. And he thought it was rather boring. And so he told me, he said, you know, I think you're just looking at it all wrong. He said, I think you need to consider that perhaps Belmonte doesn't believe in love, and that's why he talks about it so much, because he goes on and on about it. He's just trying to convince himself of the power of love. And he said, and perhaps when we talk about Constanza, you know, it's not that she's actually faithful, but it's that she's really struggling with whether or not she should be faithful. Like she wants to have an affair. And these were the directions that this director wanted me to go, and he wanted me to play the role very nervous and uncertain and unsure. And at the end, we arrive at the final rehearsal and opening night, and he tells me, he says, you did it. He says, you have really captured the vision that I was looking for. I'm so proud of you. It's wonderful. Congratulations. And then the reviews come out. And they say, meh. They say, yeah, I mean, this new tenor who the opera house hired, he's okay, but he's not great. And why in the world would Constanza want to go with such a nervous twit like this guy? And they just did not like it. And so I went and I got the video from the performance and I watched it, and guess what? I agreed with them. I didn't like it. I didn't sing well. I didn't sing at all like I was singing when I arrived. I didn't like the acting. There were so many things about it that I didn't like, and I didn't really know how to solve the problem. In fact, I didn't really know what the problem was. And it was a busy season. I had a lot of new operas to learn. I had 14 performances of Belmonte that year, 14 spread out over the year, and they were all basically mediocre because I never got the chance to take the time to fix it. But in the summer, I did. I took the time and I revisited my original coachings and my original inspirations, and I realized I could do this entire staging without changing anything except for my internal motivations. I could be true to my voice and not change the staging, with the exception of one scene. There was one scene, it was the fourth aria that Belmonte sings called the Baumeister aria, and it's basically a huge declaration about the power of love. And in the staging, my colleague Uwe Eickerte would console me because I didn't believe in love as I sang about love. And I told Uwe, I said, I have to make this change. I'm doing your acting. I'm going to console you, and you're going to let me console you, or you can stay with the original staging and you can console me, but I'm going to console you anyway, and it's going to look silly. And Uwe said, okay. And so we changed. We didn't tell anybody we were changing. And from the very beginning, I noticed a big difference. I noticed the audience was with me. I was being true to my instincts. I toned down my nervousness as an actor, and I really started to sing about the power of love. And I believed it, and I allowed myself to believe it, and the audience believed it, and we arrived at the final aria, and it was a big success. And the rest of the season went really nicely because I had finally found my voice. I had learned the importance of using that. In essence, I had been a puppet to the voice of the director, okay? And that was something I had to learn. Students, you can be a puppet to the voice of your professor. And it's not a good place to be. You need to be your voice. And sometimes that means you have to go it alone. For time, oh, we're running so late here. Okay, so I'll skip over this first one and go straight to this one. So a few years later, I'm singing Macduff in the Shakespeare setting by Verdi of Macbeth. And he sings this heart-wrenching aria upon the discovery that his 3 children and wife have been murdered by Macbeth while he had run away to hide. And he sings this aria of sorrow and of vengeance, and it's just filled with emotion. And everything was going fine. The stagings were going fine. Everything's going fine until about a week and a half before opening night, the director decides to pull me aside and says, you know, it's good, but the problem is there's too much emotion in your singing. She says, the acting is great. It's exactly what I want, but the voice, it's ruining it. You need to pull it back. And here's the problem. See, I'd gone to the original, right? The original source versus secondary source. And the original source for me was Verdi. And I listened to the music, and I was like, this is emotion. It's just dripping emotion. There's nothing about it that's not emotion. And even when I thought about the words, it was the same thing. And so I decided to go it alone. I didn't say I refuse. I said, okay, I'll try. But I did my thing. And opening night came and went. Huge success. Audience loved it. The reviews loved it. And they wrote about this moment in the opera as being a real highlight of the production. They even gave the director a big chunk of that credit for the vision. And the director was so mad. So angry. And what I didn't tell you is that this director was not just a director, but she was my boss. She was my President Luxton. She was the general intendantin of the theater. And it was probably the beginning of the end of my time in Mannheim. Okay, but if I had to do it again, I would do the same thing. I was true to my voice, and therefore it worked. It just didn't work for the director because it wasn't true to her voice. But she didn't have to stand on the stage. I did. Okay, so in summary, I just want to say that it's critical that you trust your voice because it really is the best of who you are at that moment. You have to follow your voice, or you have to inform your voice, and that does include giving real respect to the original sources. You have to give real respect to the original sources or you'll get yourself into trouble. When you're the original source, then you don't have to give any respect to anything except your voice. Okay. Follow your voice because it's your truth. It is your truth. It is what you know at that moment. That's the best you got. And then the last thing is just don't suppress your voice because the world needs your brilliant ideas. And so I would leave you with the question, which is, what have you suppressed? What have you not told because you've allowed yourself to tell somebody else's voice instead of your own? Okay. Yes.
So German, Italian?
I have performed in German, Italian, French, Russian, Czechoslovakian, very little in Spanish. That's actually confusing to me because it looks like Italian to my brain. And of course English. I've sung in English quite a bit as well.
No Arabic?
No Arabic. I don't know of any. I came close to getting to do some Romanian once, but it didn't happen. Yes? Okay, well, I hadn't prepared for that, but okay. So from the opera, from that famous aria from L'Elisir. So. Una furtiva lagrima negli occhi suoi spuntò. Quelle fastose giovani invidiar sembrò. più cercando io vo, che più cercando io vo. Mamma, sì, mamma, lo vedo, lo vedo. So.